You're listening to a Soul One podcast.
How did you get here? Where did you come from? Tell me where you've been and where you're going.
My name is Mike Shepard. I'm a theater producer. I want to get to know my new community, and I've chosen to do this by sharing 1,000 meals with 1,000 artists. This week I share a meal with Rebecca. This is another artist that I did previously know before sitting down for some pasta at a return to a restaurant that I've been to before with another artist, which is the first time that's happened so far. But again, within 1,000 meals, I'm sure that's going to happen again. Rebecca and I had met during the production of Guys and Dolls that I directed last year. Rebecca auditioned and was in the show. And we got to know each other a bit through that rehearsal process. But also since Guys and Dolls has been completed, Rebecca has, I believe, done 2 other shows on stage and is now directing one with another show afterwards. Rebecca is an accomplished performer, a director, an arts administrator with a fantastic youth music organization that we do talk about a bit in our meal. I especially really liked this opportunity to sit down with someone else who recently and was currently directing a project. It's not always that I get this opportunity to talk to fellow directors just about the craft and about what goes into it. Rebecca and I have, within our own motivations and what drives us, little bits of different feelings on directing. It seems like Rebecca's so comfortable in the director's chair and comfortable there, whereas I've always felt like it's a kind of uphill battle to get myself to direct pieces. So it was really an amazing conversation to hear that perspective. I especially wanted to shout out that Rebecca is working on a project right now called One Small Misstep. This is a new musical. It was locally written. It is completely original and will be debuting at the Undercurrents Festival in Ottawa. Their performances are the weekend of February 8th and 9th. They have matinee performances as part of this festival. You can check it out through Undercurrents. You can also go to Soul One's website because Soul One is supporting this project, which we're really happy to be doing. We love musical theater and we love supporting local new work. So Rebecca and I speak a lot about that, her history, starting as a performer, her work in Toronto. She won a Dora Award as part of a fantastic opera show. And then coming to Ottawa and continuing both as a performer and a director and an arts administrator and finding room to balance all these amazing passions. So I hope you enjoy my chat with Rebecca Russell.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Russell. I'm a performing artist, director, and an arts administrator.
So I'm really curious because I'm biased about your theater history in particular before like anything else, especially because you won a Dora.
Yes.
And I want to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So I'm also an opera singer. I don't do a lot of opera anymore.
Okay.
But I trained as a classical singer.
Okay.
Which was very helpful for Guys and Dolls because that was actually higher. The range was higher for me than I normally sing. So
really?
So I had to break out the technique there. It was all good, and it was a good challenge for me because I'm actually a mezzo. I'm not a soprano.
Okay, you could have fooled me. So it's so funny that you just say that because I was just talking to like a music person and going over some music stuff, whatever. And he said to me, "Oh, you know more than you think you do about music." And I was feeling really good about myself. And then you said that, and now I'm like, "Oh, so I know nothing," because I would have pegged you as a soprano.
Well, there are a lot of different voice types
Okay.
for classical singing, and so depending on what you subscribe to as the types that you agree on, you can have a huge range or a smaller range. So for female voices, this sort of the smallest range is you have the soprano, you have the mezzo soprano, and then you have the contralto, sometimes referred to as alto. Now this is the classical version of this system, but within those three female voice types, I'm just talking female voice types right now, it's broken down into quite a wide range of voice types within that sort of umbrella.
That makes sense.
So when you look within what notes those particular voice types are supposed to be able to sing, for certain sopranos and certain mezzo types, it's actually not that different. It's more about the tone and the quality of the voice, as opposed to exactly which notes you sing. Now, for coloratura sopranos, they have a very high range, and I would never sing that rep because it doesn't suit me at all. But there's definitely some soprano roles that cross over with mezzos that have a higher range. So I do have a high range for a mezzo. I've got a 4-octave range. So it's quite wide for any voice type. So I was really able to lean into learning more about my soprano side of Guys and Dolls, which was very interesting.
That is really interesting. That's not. I thought you were a soprano. I would have pegged you as that, but that's really interesting. And so, was that what the door was for, like opera?
It was for opera. Yeah, it was for an ensemble performance. So best ensemble in an opera. And so this was a production by Against the Grain Theater. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I am familiar with Against the Grain. So this was Against the Grain's production of Handel's Messiah. So it was a fully staged version of Handel's Messiah with contemporary choreography. Because Handel's Messiah is usually performed on book and stationary. It's an oratorio, which means it's a sacred opera. So it has sacred text from a biblical source. So an oratorio is basically an opera, but with sacred text. And it's usually not memorized and sung on book and very stationary. They put all that out the window. So said we're going to have a 16-person chorus, which is going to be dancing, contemporary choreography the entire time while they're singing. And we're going to have some crazy costumes. There's not really going to be a storyline per se, but there will be sort of a through line theme of the journey that this group of people are on. We don't really know where they're going because there's no storyline in particular. But yeah, the journey of, kind of finding community, finding people along the way. So it was a very interesting experience.
It sounds really fascinating.
So I sung the alto. So there's soprano and alto as part of the alto ensemble. And it was a great experience. It was challenging, but it was super interesting because I love dance and movement as well. So it was everything was up my alley. It was like contemporary choreography with opera, which was weird. I love anything like that. So
that's really cool.
Yeah, and then we won the Dora.
That's amazing.
Best ensemble.
That's really amazing.
And it was it was a very young group of people as well. Like these were all people that were just out of music school. So it was quite a young group of people. So it was really cool for all of them to kind of bring that together.
And did you go to school in the Toronto area? Like, were you also?
No, I went to Dal actually. Cheers.
Oh, cheers. Yes, actually, I think you might have told me that. Yeah.
So I did a degree in both music and theater. So I did a classical voice degree along with a theater degree.
Multi-talented. Yeah. The rest of us had to stick to just theater. We couldn't do anything else. And then how, before you did this show in Toronto, were you there already? Had you auditioned elsewhere and came to Toronto to do the show?
So I was, so after I finished theater school, then I worked professionally for about 5 years as a performer. I did worked with various companies. I toured for quite a long time with Mermaid Theatre of Nova Scotia, around the world, really. We went to North America, we went to Europe. And that was a great experience, but also very hard to be on the road for 2.5 years. So at the end of that, I decided, I love being in the arts community, but I feel like I have more to give. And I'd always loved writing and communications. And I said, well, you know what, I'm going to go back to school for communications with the goal of then working with arts organizations. Because I know there's lots of amazing arts organizations out there that could use a hand in that particular department. So,
Sure.
Yeah, so I moved to Toronto, didn't really know anybody there, and took a postgraduate program at Centennial College with communications. And then from that, started meeting people. And then pretty much right after school, then I got a job with what at that time was the Actors Fund of Canada,
Okay.
which is now the AFC, the Lifeline for Canada's entertainment industry.
Right.
Which is emergency funds for people that work in the arts and entertainment industry in Canada that come along a difficult situation that they weren't expecting. They were ill, they had an accident, something has happened in their life personally where they aren't able to work. And as people are often working contract to contract in the performing arts industry. And then there's no money coming in the door.
Yeah.
How do you pay your bills?
Yeah.
How do you get some groceries on the table? So the AFC was there to help people out. And, it's a really worthwhile charity. So I worked with them for 3 years. Before then, I moved to Ottawa and started working with OrKidstra, which is what I still currently work with.
Yeah.
So I do both communications and development. So I trained in communications and I learned development on the job. So that's fundraising.
Very cool. Yeah. That's really, And I mean, that's so important. Development work is really important. Communications is important.
It is, for
it's
sure.
It's all very, very important. That's what I did for several years for theater companies, development work. And same thing as you. I did a lot of training in communications, but learned development as
Most
you go.
people don't go to school for fundraising.
No.
You kind of learn it on the job. So
Yeah. And well, it's fascinating because it's so, depending upon the organization, it could be so multi-pronged. You've got fundraising events, you've got donors, you've got different, campaigns that you want to run, you've got different projects that you want to fund for, not to even mention grants and grant writing and that side of it. So there's a lot.
There's a lot, yeah. And so my job is Director of Development and Communications with OrKidstra. So I do all of those things that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Including the grant writing.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm also working on grant writing. Tis the season.
Tis the season.
Though, I mean, I'm sure you have cycles. I mean, most grants do. Most organizations
absolutely.
do. Yeah. I mean, I find it can be never ending, but then you get into a cycle where it's okay. This period of time we know we're grant writing. This period of time we know we're doing a donor campaign, for example.
Absolutely.
Do you find that happens?
Absolutely. And then sometimes a grant will come up out of the blue and be a really great fit and want an application, next week. And you already have something else on the go. And then you have to figure out, okay, is it worth it, to pull focus from the other thing and focus on this grant? So, it's always a balancing act.
One of the things that I'm really excited to be working on is this sort of complementary grant system that I'm trying to create, where I'm sure you have seen when you put a project together and you apply for a grant and like you got 75% of the money or what have you. The idea of a fund being out there for your project is going ahead and you're still looking to fill a certain thing. And so here's money to kind of go towards it.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
Because I feel every time I applied for a grant, it was, you got to make a new project. But there wasn't as much for, it's already existing. And yeah, maybe we're getting
Completely
operating funding or whatever, but we're down $5,000 or whatever. Where can we find it? And that's one of the things that I'm working on, because I think that's kind of a cool hole to fill of like, an organization has that, they're $5,000 short. What do we do? it's a significant shortfall depending upon what the project is, right? So kind of working with companies and to put that together, and that idea of to approach organizations and say, okay, once you apply for your grants, what are you missing? And how can we kind of have you apply to this program and kind of get funding that way?
Yeah, I think that's really great. There's a lot of emphasis, and I'm sure you know this as well, on applying for funding for something new and shiny. So it's a project that's new and shiny and really exciting. And people love funding that.
Oh, yes.
But something that is ongoing and is already working, there is less interest in funding that.
Yes.
And we need a fundamental change with that. We need more operational funding. We need more program funding for things that are already working, already making a difference in the community. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir there, but the folks on the podcast that may not work in this field.
I'm 100% on your side on this, because I just feel like it's the day-to-day that keeps your company going. And the new shiny projects are a lot of fun, and I understand the appeal of funding those. But without your day-to-day, how are you going to get there? Even day-to-day projects. Like, it doesn't have to be administrative costs. I mean, it's part of it, but you have projects that you have that are yearly and you're doing. To get more funding for those, I think, are important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, my interest is going to be the same: theater and then youth programming. I think youth arts programming is really crucial and important.
I completely agree. Yeah.
So that's always going to be an area where I'm like, okay, these are the two areas that I want to focus on.
Yeah. We do specifically music at OrKidstra.
But with youth.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Children.
With youth. Absolutely.
To me, it's an or. It's not theater for you. It's theater, or you work in youth and the arts.
You work with youth and the arts.
That's my opinion. Because I music, as we both know, connects to theater all the time. Musical theater, right? Like, I really think that it's a great program. Like, I think these things we need more of them, or we need more funding to let the ones we have grow. Because I just think it's so crucial.
Absolutely, yeah. We offer our programs for free, so that it is barrier-free for youth that are facing barriers in other areas of their life. So these are a lot of youth that come from impoverished backgrounds. These are youth that are often new to Canada. So we're opening those doors for folks that the doors were shut to. And that, it makes a big difference. It really, really does.
When I first arrived in Ottawa, I think I saw a concert put on by you guys, because it would have been down at the church on Cooper and something. Yes. Because I was new and I didn't know anyone, and I was like, I'm going to go see art stuff.
Great.
And I went and I can't remember what one it was, but it was like the first year I was here.
Yeah.
So
was it a holiday one or?
It would have been holiday.
It would have been holiday.
Yes, because it would have been, I arrived in like January of 2021, whenever the convoy was. I arrived like a week earlier, and my first Ottawa experience was living downtown and having that happen.
Sorry.
And then I really siloed myself for the summer. But then the fall, I was like, I'm going to things. So it would have been something late.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. It's it's a wonderful experience because the concert is free. Anybody can come. Just find it about it randomly, like yourself, and come and enjoy some great music.
Yeah.
And at least I hope you felt like a real sense of community when you were there at the concert.
I did, and I felt like this is the kind of thing that a lot of people were missing. Like, I found arts and theater so late that I think if I was younger, I would have liked this kind of thing, but I didn't really do it till so late in the game. It was never
what
really
do you mean as late?
Like, I did a theater thing in class for a project in grade 8 because I had to, and then in grade 10 I took drama class, and then I was on stage for the first time age like 19-ish.
Okay, so you were still a teenager.
Still a teenager. But I didn't have that story of like theater camp and young and I was very much sports. And my parents were very encouraging of the arts. Very, like, I remember taking piano lessons.
Yes.
But I would go to the theater with my parents. Like, my mom especially, we would go to, because none of their other children were interested. It was just me. So I would go, and I saw Men of La Mancha and Oliver, and Phantom of the Opera and all these like great shows.
Oh, excellent.
When I was young.
Yeah.
My parents would go take us to Stratford and all these places. So they were very encouraging of it, but I think there was a part of me that always like longed for it and was so interested, but I never did it until I was like a teenager, late teens. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you found it when you even, a little bit later.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too. Oh, it's such an interesting thing to where people sort of begin. And in doing 1,000 Meals, especially, like so many people had, like, art was just such a big part of their time growing up.
Absolutely.
But I've found people do find like the real passion for it at different points and spread all over. Like I was talking to Kevin,
Yes.
who we know, and I was really surprised when he said that he'd only been really doing musical theater for 2 years.
Because he was more focused on just music before that.
Music,
He does the improv as
and
well.
improv, yeah, but had never really
Put the two
together.
Yeah.
Which I was just so surprised because that's such a natural kind of come together of the two. But like that kind of surprises me when I hear that. Just because I grew up with running a theater company, everyone had the same story. Theater camp. As a kid, really into it, and I never did any of those things. Yeah. It's really interesting. So when did theater come to play now with you? Because I knew what your job was, but I would describe you as someone who still does a lot of acting and a lot of performing.
Yes.
So
yeah,
you clearly never lost that, right?
No. And so when I decided to, go back to school for communications, and then I, became an arts administrator, there was a period of time where I didn't do any performing, and I had just come off touring for 2.5 years. And so I think that was a necessary break for me.
Okay.
And because I was focused on school, but then once I was established, kind of in my new job, then the interest started to creep back, and I thought, maybe there'd be something that would be interesting for me to do. And a friend of mine from university who was working for the Royal Conservatory in Toronto had posted on Facebook. She was like, "Oh, we're looking for a mezzo to help out with this student show at the Royal Conservatory." And I was like, "Great, I'm a mezzo, I'm available." So I messaged her, and she was like, "Oh yeah, perfect." And so I ended up in this show as a community member with all students at the Royal Conservatory in Toronto, and these were all voice students in the Royal Conservatory. In this really fun sort of comedic opera, and that had a lot of dance in it. And after I had been in rehearsals for a while, the choreographer said to me, "Oh, it's great. So they hired you because you had dance skills." I was like, "Absolutely not."
Well, I mean, you had danced, like you not maybe formally, but you had done.
Absolutely, yeah. I had dance training, but she thought they had brought me in because I was a dancer.
Oh.
I said, no, they brought me in because I was a mezzo. I just also happen to have dance skills.
Dance skills, yeah.
So I worked with this choreographer, Jen Nichols, who was fabulous. She's a wonderful choreographer, director in Toronto, and had a great time with that comedic opera. And it's that sort of started me working on kind of indie opera in Toronto.
Okay.
And then Jen and the director of that show, Joel, were working on then the Handel's Messiah, which we just talked about with Against the Grain. And so they called and said, "Oh, do you want to be part of this?" And I was like, "Yeah, great." And so, I didn't really audition for anything in Toronto, which is the weird thing.
That's
I literally auditioned for like maybe one thing in Toronto.
Yeah.
And it was just through people I knew and just happened to have the skills that people were looking for at the time that I ended up in, kind of doing a bunch of indie opera in Toronto, which I loved. It was great.
That's really cool. And so when you look to do a project, whether it's then or now or what have you, like has that changed at all? What would motivate you to audition or to want to get involved? Like, is there something about it then versus now? Has that changed? Are you always looking for the same thing? Like, what's that process in your mind when you pick a project to work on?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I perform and I direct. So is
it different?
I think for me, it is and it isn't.
Okay.
When you're directing a show, I think there needs to be a real connection. At least for me, there needs to be a real connection with the story.
Sure.
There needs to be
Sure.
real connection with the message that the show is conveying. Because I have limited time. I work a full-time job during the day. I try to be discerning now. My husband will be happy to hear me say this on the podcast.
It's on record now.
It's on record now. I try to be discerning about the projects I take on because I work a full-time job. OrKidstra, I'm also on record, OrKidstra has been incredibly supportive. And they continue to be very supportive of all their workers with their arts projects.
That's great.
Which
That's
is wonderful.
really great.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah.
So when I'm directing a project, I really want to have a real connection with the story, with the message, with the style of the show as well. There's just some shows I wouldn't be interested in the style of. Generally, something that involves the combination of music and theater will always be more appealing to me because both of those things are my background.
Yeah.
Both those things are my passion, and bringing those together sometimes in unexpected ways is something that's important to me. If I'm auditioning for something, I still want to be interested in the story and the message, but I also want to be interested in a specific role that the show is offering.
Interesting. Okay.
So what does this role offer that I feel would be interesting to me, would be challenging to me?
Okay.
Do I feel like, I can bring something to as a performer? That I feel is going to stretch me in some way. I feel like that's important in kind of this stage of my life.
Yeah.
And also that it's just well suited. I'm not going to try out for something that's probably in the bottom of my range because it's just not going to be as fun for me to sing in the basement all the time.
Sure. And also put yourself in a position to be successful. Like, I think that's a big point of even casting a show or auditioning. It's like you want to put yourself in a position where you're the most comfortable, which means you can be successful, especially when it comes to vocals and that kind of thing, like range. Mm-hmm. So I get that. So again, because I have this as a reference, I'm just curious, like what was it about Sarah from Guys and Dolls that made you go, okay, I want to audition? If that was the role, I mean, I think it was the role you were interested in. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it was the role I was.
I don't have the sheets in front of me. It was like a year ago, but yeah, like what was it about that role?
I found her background to be very relatable to mine personally. I'm a preacher's kid.
Yeah.
My dad's a minister. Yeah. I grew up in the church.
Yeah.
That was my first experience with music, really, was in the church. I sang in the church choir. We would do a little, the nativity play and, having those arts experiences through the church and just being part of that world, I found was very relatable. Number one, to Sarah's character, being part of the mission and having that such a big part of her life. Number one, that was very relatable for me. I really love the music in Guys and Dolls. And my voice is more suited for sort of traditional musical theater, classical music theater. I'd be interested in the future to try to push myself more and to do kind of more contemporary styles. But at this point in time, my voice is very suited to sort of the classic musical theater.
I think you could definitely do contemporary. There are times where I will listen to soundtracks. I'm not a big listen to music person. I just don't listen to it on a day-to-day basis. I do it more for purposes. Mm-hmm. So often when I'm looking at musicals or I'm thinking of something that I want to work on, I'll listen to soundtracks, and I have sat there and been like, oh, I know this person. I can hear their voice. I can name contemporary musicals where I'm like, oh, that sounds like Rebecca. I'm like, oh, I can see that. Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, well, write me a list now.
I will, yeah. Guys and Dolls is such an interesting show because, as you say, it is this sort of classical, quintessential musical. It's one of those classics. I just also feel that it has this interesting time capsule quality to it.
It does, absolutely.
Even though it's dated, it's still funny.
It's still funny, yeah. And I think that says a lot about how good the writing was at that point in time.
That's right, yeah.
That, something that was written so long ago can still be, so amusing for the audience today.
It's
There was
funny
only
as
a couple of jokes that were like,
that does
we don't know what that
don't
is.
know what
We
that
have
means.
no idea
Yeah,
what
we
that
have no.
means.
That's so dated. But it reads much more like a sitcom. Like it has that cadence to it
Mhm.
and that feel.
Yeah, the writing is very snappy. You know, it moves at a quick pace.
Yeah.
Which I like.
It was when I was younger, I directed Guys and Dolls, like in my 20s.
Yeah, I remember you saying you had directed it before.
Yeah, when I was running my theater company in Kingston, and I was still at Queen's at the time. I was in a real discovering the arts very much. So I was in a real like artsy, everything has to have a high concept place. So the
Okay.
first time I did Guys and Dolls, I did not lean into the comedy. Whereas this time around, I knew if I were ever to do it again, or like, no, I'm leaning just into the way it is comedically and the kind of ridiculousness of it.
Yeah, I think the comedy is one of the best things about that show, to be honest.
I
Like the music
agree.
is great, but yeah, the comedy is so excellent.
This Guys and Dolls has one of the better second half sequences where it goes from Crapshooter's Dance to Luck Be a Lady to Sit Down and Rock. Well, Marry the Man Today, Sit Down and Rock and Boats in there, Sue Me. Like they're all in a row,
Yeah.
and it's just like great song after great song after great song after great song. And that's what I always referred to as like musical theater murderer's row. If you can make it through it, you're going to be great.
Yeah.
Like this is what you got to hit.
This is what you got
It's
to hit.
this section.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And a lot of classical musicals, I feel like, have a very similar sequence built into it. And you mentioned something you said about when choosing a story to direct and having to connect with it in that way. I find that to be not only like so true, but pretty crucial, because I personally think you can tell when a director isn't as connected to the material or doesn't really find the same passion within it. And I mean,
Yeah, I
again, there
would
are
agree
brilliant
with
directors
that.
who direct a bunch of things that I'm sure they do their best work. But I feel like you can tell, both as someone participating and also an audience member, when it really connects with someone versus when it doesn't. I don't know if you've found that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know if I can think of a specific instance for that, but yeah, no, I completely agree. Because you, as a director, as you know, you have to sit with that material for so long.
Yeah.
If you don't love that material, then you're going to start hating your life, and I think that will translate to how you work on the show.
Well, and longer than even the rehearsal process, because there's prep periods. You're sitting with the
Absolutely,
show
you have
forever.
to sit with the longest of anybody on the team. So,
You know, I often you're planning a year in advance. You're even longer depending upon the project and company and how it's set
absolutely.
up. So it's such a long. It's so interesting how so much work is done in the shortest timeline that you're with the show, because you're with it for such a long time, and then there's phases where you bring in the production team, you bring in the cast, you work the cast with the band, you get it into the space, and everything gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, and then you run the show.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. It's a fascinating, wild thing directing. It's a little crazy too. Like you have to be a little nuts to
little
want
bit,
to take
yeah.
on that much.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think having a clear plan, but also being flexible, being
Yeah.
adaptable to things that come up, I think is really important.
Well,
as a director.
certainly when you're working in the community. You know, it's a little different when you're working in an atmosphere where this is our job for these 6 weeks, and we're all here from 10 to 5, and it's a bit of a different sort of structure.
Yeah, a little bit of a different structure.
When you work in the community, I mean, you're dealing with shifting priorities, and even each company shifting schedules. And, some companies have, limitations on how much you can rehearse, which makes total sense. I have no problem with that. But those are things that you just work around. You make it work. You work around the limitations you're given, and you work with what you have. But I'm glad I can talk to another director, especially because you have both experience in the professional world and at the community level. Isn't it interesting how similar they are? Even though they should seem like they're miles apart, but it's so like the same. Like it's not as much of a leap as
It's not as
one
much
might
a leap
think it is.
as
Yeah.
one might think, especially in Ottawa. there are loads of folks who do community shows here in Ottawa who absolutely can work professionally. In another city, in another sort of version of their lives.
Yeah.
They have the talent, they have the passion. There may not be the same opportunities here in Ottawa to make that a steady career.
That's true.
Which is one of the things I found the most challenging, to be honest, as when I was self-employed as a performer. It was when you got a project you love, it was like honestly the best thing ever. And then that project ended and maybe you didn't have another project lined up immediately. And then what was happening with your life? You're working your job or whatever was happening. And I found that to be very challenging. So I'm very happy where I am now that I have a job that is very fulfilling. I'm fortunate now where I am in my life where I have a job that's very fulfilling, where I work 8 to 4. And then I'm able to take on creative projects that, I have a real interest in, and I don't have to worry about that being my source of income.
Yeah, which is
pay
nice.
the bills, which is really nice. I really always appreciate when when I get some compensation, and generally there are for most of the projects I work on, but sometimes not, and that's okay if it's a project that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. What would you, and you don't have to answer this if it's too much, but what would you say is your driving force when it comes to like the example, I don't know, like aspirations? Like if you've ever played Sims and characters have different aspirations, what would you say yours is? Are you aspired to achieve certain things in your work life? Is work life more of a balance with other artistic pursuits? Like, I'm just interested to see where people find their priorities and find their joy and find what you say about rewarding. Where in your life do you find those things? I would say the most important to find it in those aspects.
Yeah, I think I find things, aspects of things that are rewarding in all aspects of my life, which is nice to be able to say that.
Very much so.
So today, as I said, when I was working on a grant application, yes, it is not the most exciting thing in my life, but I know the impact that's going to have on the kids. And when I hear the kids perform and I see their faces and they're just so proud of what they've achieved, and I hear their stories about the wonderful life skills they've gained and how well they're doing now in their lives. That means a lot to me. So I find that very rewarding. And so I'll say that to people, even if there are aspects of my job which I don't find the most interesting,
sure,
the end goal is always extremely rewarding for me.
I think that's understandable. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
As I said, my job has always been very supportive of my other artistic projects as well. So yeah, in terms of end goals with other artistic projects, I don't know if I have a specific end goal. I think my overall goal is just keep growing as an artist, to find projects that will challenge me in some way, so I learn something new. I think that's always important to me, to be learning something new along the way.
Yeah.
And keep growing and developing my skills, which is probably why I can check quite a few boxes when they ask what your skills are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quite a few boxes I can check.
Yeah.
And I think that's because I've been always so interested in learning new things.
Yeah, it is really great to be able to do that, and it's nice that, as you say, that the job you do for finances is still so connected in the arts and so important.
Absolutely.
And so grounded that you're right. When you sit down and write that grant, and it's tedious and it's hard and it's difficult and it's not my favorite thing in the world, I would almost rather do anything else. But what keeps, I think, you going is the sense of, yeah, but if you get it, the impact is really, really great. It's worth it.
It's worth it, exactly.
1,000 Meals with 1,000 Artists is a project of Soul One Arts, Inc. Produced by Michael Shepard and Zach Porter. Edited by Zach Porter. Original music by Savannah Shea. Thanks to this week's artists and the local Ottawa restaurants who host us and support the work that we do. For more information on 1,000 Meals and Soul One, please visit our website at www.soulonearts.ca. If you're an artist and you'd like to be on the show, please connect with us on our website to book your own meal. Thanks for listening.